Well, the Force must be very strong with you if you have found your way to this particular episode of the Gracious Guest Show, because Star Wars is absolutely the thing that this episode is all about today, specifically Star Wars: The Last Jedi. And I am your host of the show, host of the Gracious Guest Show, Mike Creevy. So happy that you are tuning in today. And you've no doubt discovered this show through word of mouth or through iTunes, the iTunes store, through, what else? Podbean, Pocket Casts, various other ways of discovering the Gracious Guest podcast. And however you have found it, I'm happy that you're here. Please spread the word about the show, and hopefully we'll get some expanding of the audience to people who are interested in trying to get to the heart of wonder. Wonder in movies and books and day-to-day life, the experience of, the stuff that we can't quite put our finger on, can't quite see, can't quite perceive in the ordinary sort of means. But that doesn't mean that there's just nothing there. In fact, there's a whole really just rich and incredible world beyond that which we can see, and that's what this program really is all about, trying to tap into a little bit. So, what better way than to explore the new Star Wars movie? I tried to follow, by the way, a kind of unwritten etiquette among Star Wars fans, that you don't put anything out with spoilers in it until, the movie or the TV show or whatever the Star Wars thing is that you're reviewing has been out for about a week. So I've heard of that before in a couple different places, and trying to make sure that you don't ruin anything for someone. I immediately actually think of, there was an old Simpsons episode you might remember where Homer, it's like a flashback to when Homer and Marge went to see Star Wars Empire Strikes Back, and it's a shot of them walking out of the theater past the line down the street of people waiting to go in to see the next showing. And as they walk out, Homer's carrying his popcorn and stuff, and he's like, "Oh, I can't believe Darth Vader is Luke's father." And like everybody in the line's just like, "Are you kidding me?" Like they get all upset. So this, and that's, that was 1980, so it's obviously a lot easier to have it spoiled for you today, as I did in a lot of ways with Force Awakens, as I mentioned on one of my last shows. So I was trying to avoid that this time, and I must say, with one or two minor exceptions that were not fundamental to the plot, I went in spoiler-free this time and did not know the ending, and, some of you may be like, well, yeah, why is that hard? I don't know. It's just hard for me. So I'm patting myself on the back a little bit that I was able to do that. At any rate, before we get into my spoiler-filled mini review, because there's so much here. I've been talking to some friends about this. Obviously, if you're listening to this, you might be aware of a lot of the backlash out there over this movie, and some very divergent opinions on it, quite frankly. So before we get to that, I'm just going to jump right over to another fun segment. This is another installment of our little segment with our field correspondent, Noelle, my little daughter, who's a little over a year old. And every now and then, Noelle likes to review something or likes to share what she's up to. So let's go ahead and jump over and see what Noelle's up to now. Check it out. Noelle, are you excited for this year's Christmas? Okay. Yeah, you just woke up from a nap. Were you dreaming about Were you dreaming about your Christmas presents? Yeah. What do you think you're going to get on Christmas? Oh, you're going to hit the wind guard. Okay. So what do you think you're going to get for Christmas? That sounds pretty good. Anything else? Anything else? You're not so sure? Uh-huh. Oh, okay. Man, she is just so good at what she does, getting out there. She really gets in it, She gets down into the dirt, down in the trenches of real life. and helps ground us in kind of what's going on in her experience. So yeah, it is Christmas Eve that I'm recording this on, and it's just a lot of fun stuff going on the holiday season. But I did say, as I mentioned, I wanted to get into The Last Jedi and unpack just a little bit of it, because there's a lot here. This, of course, is the 8th episode in the Skywalker saga, the second act, if you will, of these new trilogy movies. You have spin-off movies coming out. Rogue One came out last year, of course, telling the story of what led right up to the events of Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. You have Solo, the Han Solo origin movie coming out next Christmas time. You have all sorts of different discussions about a future trilogy that Rian Johnson, who wrote and directed The Last Jedi, has been handed by Lucasfilm and by Disney. We don't know anything yet about what that's going to be about. He barely knows. He's developing it. But that's significant, and I wanted to mention that first, because I was thinking about this in the lead up to The Last Jedi coming out, which I was, of course, very excited for. And, I kept coming back to, yes, there's a lot of opinions. There's a lot of people that disagree with a lot of things about the new direction, in a sense, of Star Wars. But just from a, kind of a big picture perspective here, when they announced that Rian Johnson was given sort of a blank check for another trilogy, which, that's a better part of 10 to 12 years or more that's going to take, that is enormously significant, because in a sense, Rian Johnson is becoming kind of like the new George Lucas, I guess you could say. And, you look at the fact that Disney / Lucasfilm, I mean, there have been disputes over directors and writers. They, they basically are they don't dance around with this. This is a big deal. Getting this right from their perspective is a big deal, because there's a lot of things at stake, more than just, the particular plot details of a movie. There's, people's jobs are at stake here. This is about story. This is about, mythos that's very significant in American folklore. It's about ticket sales. It's about toys. It's about all of it. And if you want to, I don't know, just my opinion is, if you want to pretend that it's not about all of that, go ahead. But I think you're just going to get wrapped around the axle, and you're going to miss some stuff. And the bottom line is, there's a lot of story ideas out there. There's a lot of ideas about Star Wars, because it's so cherished by so many people. A lot of people have ideas and things you'd like to see happen. There were things I'd like to see happen in a couple movies that didn't happen. At some point, I think the fans need, in my opinion, need to remember that it is a movie. It's not real life. We need to, go along to get along in some sense. And honestly, I think that's the only way you can be open to being surprised, to not having it be exactly controlled the way you want it to be. Sometimes you need to go on faith a little bit. So anyway, that's just my 2 cents on that. But the fact that they gave Rian Johnson a new trilogy before they even had ticket sales, before they had reaction, to me, says a lot. That they put a lot of investment in Rian Johnson, and they liked whatever he did with Episode 8. So I went into Episode 8 kind of knowing that, and just thinking, this will be interesting. I had some concerns, I had some fears about, what are they going to do with the movie? Well, let me just lay it out. I love the episode that we're talking about today, Episode 8. I love Star Wars The Last Jedi. There, I said it. Some of you might just think I'm nuts. Some of you might be like, yeah, everybody loves it. Yeah, well, no, not everybody does. There's some people that absolutely hated it. There's people that are going kind of catatonic over it. And then, beyond that, or behind that rather, short of that I should say, there's some people who I think just genuinely did not like what happened in it, for a lot of different reasons. And I've, heard some people make some really good arguments, and, look, and here's the thing. It's not perfect. Of course not. So just to be clear, I'm not here at all today to discuss, details about, Starship Protocol, or things that are like little details in the overall picture of Star Wars that are off or that don't jive with previous movies or things we saw before. I trust you on that. I'm a big fan. There are bigger fans than me out there for sure. That's not really what I'm interested in. And that's one of the things that I keep scratching my head over. A lot of people, the things people are getting fixated on are things I just kind of don't see or don't really agree with. And so to keep this kind of focused here and relatively short, I wanted to focus on, because of my background, my interest too, as I see it, there is a very interesting exploration in The Last Jedi of certain things that touch on what are in Catholic tradition known as the theological virtues. Virtue, essentially in the Christian tradition, I mean, virtue, there's a lot of definitions of virtue. You hear that word, we kind of, get an idea of what it means. In the Christian tradition, virtue is basically a good moral habit. So, I mean, there's a lot to it, but it's obviously, it's something that has to be practiced. It's something that, requires effort on your part. And there's natural virtues like that, like courage, and that sort of thing. That, I mean, it's not expressly something connected to your religious life or flowing from that solely. But with the theological virtues, these are mentioned throughout Scripture, faith, hope, and love. And again, like, we use those words in lots of different ways. In the Catholic sense of this, faith, hope, and love have a very specific connection to and flowing from and returning to God. And I'm not going to get into all that in this episode. That's not the point. But as I see it, these three things show up all throughout The Last Jedi in a way that I don't think we've really seen before, quite frankly. So let me just run through these a little bit. And again, spoiler alert, turn back now. If you have not seen The Last Jedi, do not listen to anything I'm saying from here on. Okay? I do not want to ruin it for anybody. So, spoiler alert, spoiler alert, spoiler alert. There it is. Everything from here on out has spoilers in it. So, faith. This one was interesting because there was a lot of suggestion in the build-up to this movie and the trailers and that sort of stuff. We knew coming into it that Luke was having a crisis of faith. Even from The Force Awakens. The first line in the scroll at the beginning, Luke Skywalker has vanished. Okay, I wasn't expecting that. Like in coming out of Return of the Jedi, everything's back. Like, Luke's back, he's optimistic. Mark Hamill has said, that this was a real challenge for him in this role in Rian Johnson's vision of, how do you take the most optimistic character in Star Wars and kind of bring him way down like this? And there were creative disputes over that. But what Rian Johnson envisioned here was a Luke who has sort of lost his way. And I agree. I did not see this coming. I wouldn't have expected this. It's not what I grew up with the expanded universe envisioning. But I think it's extremely important to pursue this for a lot of reasons. The idea is that, it's not just a once and done thing. Like, he has this confrontation with his father at the end of Return of the Jedi. He brings Darth Vader back from the dark side. It's this great happy ending. But it's not over. The fight goes on. And the fight goes on, and as he says in Last Jedi, for many years there was balance, But then the darkness rises. And of all people, his own nephew. This is very deeply personal. And Luke is all that's left. He puts all this weight on his shoulders. In a sense, he gets this kind of pride over it, maybe without even meaning to, the idea that it all comes down to him. And in a weird way, he's criticizing at one point to Rey, he's criticizing the Jedi Order for their past, of their hubris and their arrogance. And, he's a little, grumpy, to say the least, in his attitude. He's very jaded and all that. And he's kind of attacking the whole concept of it all. But he's doing that because, in a sense, he has lost faith. He knows that he tried. He was starting a new Jedi Order, and then of all people, his own nephew ruined it all. But he ruined it all, as you find out in the movie, partly because of what really sent him over the edge was when Luke saw the darkness in him and was tempted to kill him in his sleep, but then decided not to do it and was filled with shame. But Kylo had woken up, Han Solo had woken up and saw him there with the lightsaber, and before Luke could explain, or he just went nuts, and that was kind of what pushed him over the edge. So knocked him out, and then destroyed the temple, took some of his students away, and ostensibly that was the beginning of the Knights of Ren, who we still have to pursue. I'm waiting to hear more about them. So then Luke goes off in this utter despair, knowing that a couple things. One, he failed. Two, he almost murdered his own nephew in his sleep, and what does that say about him? What kind of hero, what kind of legend is he? But again, it's this focus on himself still. It's this pride. It's this, he's lost his faith. But I think one of the big turning points by the end is when he snaps out of it, really, and has this redeeming experience of remembering that it isn't about him. Good or bad. And again, spoiler alert, Yoda's pep talk with him at the end, we get this beautiful moment where Luke is sort of back to, again, he's the student. You always have something to learn. This very humbling scene. And that's the key, the humility. Faith and humility go hand in hand, because it's about seeing the bigger picture beyond you. And he's talked about that to Rey. He says, this is much bigger than just the Jedi Order, but he's still fixated on it. So long story short, this fixation with himself, and how in the movie they take Luke to the pits, and you get to the point where you almost just totally give up hope for him. Only to have that faith restored, in a sense. It's not perfect, he still has his issues maybe, but in the end, by the end of the movie, he's made this decision to be his true self, his full self, his renewed Jedi Master, and he really kind of, helps us, I think, to see that faith is a daily fight. I'm up today, I'm down tomorrow, and then what choice am I going to make? Will I keep fighting to the end? Because it's not the end yet. He thinks it's the end. No, it's not. There's still more. There's still more to go. You got to keep going. You see that in all the great stories. In Lord of the Rings, Frodo just loses it at the very end, and then at the last possible moment is redeemed. That's life. And I think a lot of people hated that, to see that in Luke. But look, that's real. And if you're honest, deep down, I think, that that's real for you too. That we all have those temptations to give up, and you have those high points where you're like, oh man, it's going to be great forever. Maybe not. Prepare yourself. Don't ever give up. Don't lose, that momentum. Don't drop your guard. Don't let your guard down. You got to stay, got to keep up the good fight and all that. So that's a big theme, I think, throughout the movie, is maintaining faith and rediscovering faith when it's lost, and never giving up. Never giving up. That's a big theme. Secondly, hope. And I hinted at it already. They keep talking about the spark. And in this movie, long story short, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but, the resistance, the rebellion, leads to the restoration of the Republic. But then the Republic pretty much gets wiped out by the First Order and Force Awakens. And all you have left is this scrappy resistance. And now, by the end of Force Awakens, the entire hope for the entire galaxy, everything that they've been working for really ever since the Empire took over, it's down to a couple of people who fit on the Millennium Falcon. And that's it. How in the world is this going to work out? They've really taken us to the point of it's a scrappy group of rebel scum now, once again, in the worst shape that they've ever been in, ready to be snuffed out. The spark going out, the spark keeps being brought up. As Poe says, we are the spark that'll light the fire that'll bring the First Order down. The fire that will restore hope to the galaxy. And that's really all it is, just one tiny little ember, one tiny little spark. But what it is all about, I think, at the heart of that, why do they hold on? How can they have hope? It's because they know they are on the side of goodness, justice, that it's right, that their cause is good, that it is about freedom, it is about love, it is about justice, it is about resisting evil, resisting tyranny. And there's a few ways that they bring that up through the movie I'm not going to get into now, but that's a big theme too. Hope. Hope is not blind optimism, like, hey, everything's going to work out great. No, it's not. It's well, it might, but I'm saying hope is not optimism. And this is in the Catholic tradition, this is a big, official teaching. The theological virtue of hope does not just blindly go around like, yay, everything is going to be fine. Hope is a deep-seated trust, a deep-seated embracing of a trust that, and from the Catholic perspective, that God is ultimately guiding things, and that, the darkness is dark, but light banishes the darkness, even the smallest bit of light, that there's something to hold on to, there is hope, that it will not be snuffed out forever, that one spark is all it takes to start a fire. one lit candle is all it takes to bring light into an entire room of darkness. That is really, the fingerprints of that are all over this movie, because from beginning to end, I mean, you're on the edge of your seat, like, man, they are 2 seconds away from a cannon on a Star Destroyer wiping them out, or half a second away from being executed, or just moments away from everything falling apart, and then it doesn't. Like brought to the absolute brink, all throughout the movie. So it's just kind of hair-raising, and quite frankly, in my opinion, in a way that it just wasn't quite in aspects of the original movies. That, yeah, you had the rebellion, they could have got snuffed out at any time. Rian Johnson, I think, has taken it to a new extreme of, they are so close to being completely wiped out. And they just make it at the end of this movie, but it's not, I mean, it's just beginning, It's just beginning, and the road ahead, there's a lot of decisions that have to be made. There's a lot of question marks going into episode 9. And that ultimately, I think, brings us to the question for a lot of people: what are they fighting for? And how do they conduct themselves in the fight? So Luke, faced with that, back to that flashback of, like, that strong urge, that strong temptation to kill his own nephew, to save many people, but he can't bring himself to do it because he that's not him. He can't murder. That's not the way if he does that, they've lost, And in a sense, you can't see it at the time, but truly, that all the evil that Kylo Ren's gonna do, all of that evil does not make it worth doing evil. And there's another Catholic maxim in there, that it is always better, and I know we want to scoff at this a lot of times, but it is true, that it is always better to suffer evil than to do evil. Because suffering is awful. It's terrible. No one wants to do it. It's unjust. But suffering evil is very different, even if you die, than participating in it yourself. It does make all the difference. And that's, all these connect, faith, hope, and love. But the last piece here, love, one character says to another, well, I said spoilers already, when Rose saves Finn from trying to make this sacrifice that would ultimately probably not pay off anyway, and she knocks his ship out of the way and comes over, and he's like, why'd you stop me? She's like, I saved you, dummy. And it's kind of this sweet moment, and she says, that's how we're going to win. We're going to win by saving what we love, not by destroying what we hate. And I think that's a really good lesson, because it doesn't mean that they're not going to fight. They're going to fight. They're going to blow stuff up. They're going to, as Poe says earlier, they're going to keep jumping in X-Wings and blowing stuff up. It's Star Wars. That's the title. But at what point do you lose sight of why you're doing it, and you can't see past the death, the destruction? As a veteran myself, I've thought about this stuff a lot, obviously, and a lot of my friends who had much more difficult situations and challenges and even trauma, in combat, would tell you, it's at some point, it's hard to see any light anymore, and it's just all about the death and the destruction. And it's like, what are we fighting for? Am I fighting for something or just always against something? And fighting against something is very important sometimes. A lot of times it is, to make a stand, but it's never stronger than what you're fighting for. And if you lose sight of that, you can lose all of it. You can lose your footing, you can lose your focus, you can lose your grip on reality. You can slip into becoming the very thing you're fighting. And that goes back to the prequels, that Anakin, as Obi-Wan says to him in their big climactic fight at the end of episode 3, that you've let yourself become the very thing you promised to destroy, or to fight against. In that, letting that anger kind of rule over him. We see that going on in Kylo Ren, who I should do a whole episode, I think I will actually, another episode that just explores the theme of identity and purpose in Star Wars, and focus on Kylo Ren. I talked before, I did an episode on the temptation between Kylo Ren and Darth Vader, and how that was a little different. But to wrap this kind of bring this to a close here, getting back to Luke, he's disillusioned, but he rediscovers that faith, rediscovers that sense of purpose. And we see him at when it looks like curtains, when all the chips are down, everything just is looks like it's over. Leia even, kind of says, we fought to the end, like she's expecting it all to end, and then, the shadowed figure of Luke comes down the hall. And, at first, and I think a lot of people caught on to it, and he looks different, like something looks different. His hair is shorter, but, you're maybe thinking, well, that could just be like the sort of trope of like the hero returns and shaves or cuts his hair. There's always that idea of like a shedding of something or a change. There's different ways that they do that in film or in stories. But he shows up, he looks different, he's, a little crisper, he's calm, he seems more like the old Luke, and as he mockingly said earlier to Rey, like, you expect me to walk out, with a laser sword and face down the whole First Order, and just kind of mocking that. But then we watch as he basically goes to do just that, and you're like, what is this? And it's this awesome scene, and I know there's differences of opinion for sure on this, but just, my perspective on this. You have this incredible, like, head-scratching, like, what is going on? And they open fire with everything they have on him, and then the dust clears, and Luke's standing there unscathed and just dusts his shoulder off. And you're like, oh my gosh, this is awesome. And then Kylo Ren goes down in a fury, and he's blinded by rage, and all he can think of is just killing him, And they have this fight. Long story short, the big twist, you find out Luke isn't even there. He's force projecting himself across the entire galaxy, and it takes so much effort to do this. And this is a lot of, and I'm going to get back to some of my hang-ups with some of people's criticism of this, but just to wrap this up, he keeps Kylo's gaze fixed on him long enough for the Resistance survivors to escape, and then by the time that Luke disappears, it was very Han Solo-esque, see you around, kid, and then he vanishes, and Kylo looks, and the cave is empty, and they're gone, and he goes nuts, that he was so hell-bent on revenge, that focus, he didn't even notice, apparently, or somehow didn't click with him that Luke had the blue lightsaber that had just been destroyed. He's so just fixated on him that he just loses it, and by the time he like wakes up to like this unbelievable thing he's just seen, they're all gone, off to live to fight another day. And Luke says, as he's kind of taunting him, and he says, today the rebellion, is reborn. The war is just beginning, and I will not be the last Jedi. And then Rey has some cool stuff she does to help set everybody free and get them out on the Falcon. And that sort of passing of the torch, that we have this blessing in a sense, that Luke answers that question. Luke, who earlier in the movie had said, it's time for the Jedi to end, and he's so like, fixated on that. Like, I messed up, so it's time for all of this that's so much bigger than me to end. But at the end, he sees through, the wisdom finally sets in. No, the Jedi must go on. It will be her. Rey will renew the order. Rey will be the next Jedi. And, and it's just this moment that a lot of people, in the wake of the movie coming out, because then right after that, you see Luke back on the island, and he's floating like on this meditation rock, and and he falls down, and he looks off, and the sun turns into the two suns, from Tatooine, and he has this tremendous sense of peace and fulfillment on his face, and he vanishes. Like the Force ghost. He ostensibly becomes a Force ghost. We'll see in Episode 9. I'm sure they'll bring him back. That this one act of just pure, suffusion all through him with, like, in connecting to the Force, like, he finally, that's it, that's his rite of passage. And people are so mad about this. It did not do justice to his character. It was not fair. Here's my problem with this. Earlier, when he says that line, you want me to go face down the whole First Order with a laser sword, I think a lot of people just wanted to see Luke destroy stuff. And here's my problem with that. We've seen that before. Look, he has Force lightning, throwing stuff, tremendous Force abilities, Force choking, awesome lightsaber fights, ridiculously over-choreographed, awesome fights. They're great. They're awesome. But there's plenty of them. And I'll be honest with you. Look, I mean, Mark Hamill's great. I love him. I love Return of the Jedi and mostly Empire Strikes Back. They're my favorite Star Wars movies. But, Mark Hamill's, 66 years old? And nothing against him, but, like, I want to ask people, like, did you, like, let's talk about this. Do you really think that 66-year-old Mark Hamill whirling around a lightsaber and physically fighting Adam Driver for how knows how many, a couple of minutes on screen, do you really think that is more mind-blowingly awesome than Luke Skywalker, Jedi Master, lost his faith but now he's back, doing something no one has ever even conceived of, basically, as far as I can see, in the Star Wars saga, of force projecting himself across the entire galaxy in a non-violent act of love to defend and protect the Resistance people, to be able to get away, to keep the gaze of this evil snake of a twisted character that's very deep, though, and has a lot of, turmoil within him, the emotional connection, that this is Luke's nephew and he knows he can't save him. And that emotional connection keeping him fixed in that moment. The Luke who couldn't bring himself to kill his own father. The Luke who can't, now we know, bring himself to kill his own nephew. The Luke who is living out the truest sense of the Jedi Order, that you use the Force for knowledge and defense, never for attack. This incredibly brilliant moment that he has to pull off this great, bluff, this great distraction to give the good guys long enough to get away. To me, it blows my mind that the Christian connection here is incredible, because it's exactly what Jesus does in this tremendous outpouring. He gives everything he gives. He gives everything he has. He gives his own life to get the obsessive, foaming at the mouth, insane hatred of the devil and all the evil of all of human history locked onto him, to focus on him, to bring it all on him, so that we can escape from death and sin, through his sacrifice. That's exactly what Luke does. I will defend this forever. I know people might not like this, but it just blew me away. I was like, it's so brilliant. It was so awesome, and so, in my opinion, the perfect way for Luke to exit the story. I mean, he's so much cooler and more awesome now than anybody, any Jedi Master that I know of. He's so human because he makes mistakes and he fails. Yoda had some problems, but Yoda didn't seem to ever have that, human lack of faith, that kind of thing that, like, I struggle with. So I feel like I can connect more to Luke and have that hope now like never before. I thought it was the perfect end for his character. I never saw it coming. That act of loving self-sacrifice, but in a completely unexpected, non-violent way. That's loving non-violence. That's what people love about Martin Luther King. That's what they love about Gandhi. I think eventually in the long run people will see that. But like a lot of movies, sometimes the immediate reaction to it is just people are so all over the place on it that they might miss that. So anyways, that's kind of where we leave off. I'm so excited for episode 9. There's so many other themes to unpack in this movie, but I just wanted to mention that today in my sort of initial thoughts on The Last Jedi, what really resonated with me, throughout the movie. And the humor in it is great. There's a lot of funny moments in it, even though it has a darker kind of tone. There's a lot of questions. There's some things I'm kind of like, well, maybe they could have done that a little better, or I still have questions I'm hoping and assuming they'll bring up in episode 9. But like I said, I really want to come back and explore Kylo Ren a little bit more as well in a future installment. But for now, that's going to have to do it for my spoiler somewhat filled review of Star Wars The Last Jedi. This is a Gracious Guest show, the show where we look at wonder and we try to get into the experience of wonder. And I hope you enjoy the show. If you do, tell your friends about it. Spread the word. Give me a good review if you don't mind over on iTunes if you get a chance. Just do a review on the show if you have enjoyed it, if it helps you kind of reflect on stuff and kind of go a little bit deeper, and press pause in your busy day to kind of, tap into those deeper sort of experiences of life that we run into in sometimes the most mundane of ways. So I'm Mike Creevy, host of the Gracious Guest Show. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time, don't forget to wonder. Take care.